and welcome you formally to the podcast. Robin Dreeke, author of Sizing People Up, a veteran FBI agent's user manual for behavior prediction. You are very, very welcome to the Happy Habit podcast. On this podcast, we normally deal with health and well-being, and I'm always very keen to educate people and myself on how to become better versions of ourselves that we currently are. And part of the remit of that would be looking at behavior and certainly communication. And you are the expert as far as that is concerned. Can you tell us, first of all, though, what exactly the role of your job encompassed when you worked for the FBI?
It's a great question that I'll sum up in one word: relationships. We were in the business of relationships. You're developing relationships with confidential human sources that are going to give you information so you can develop relationships with Russian spies that are working at the United Nations on behalf of the Russian government or any other nation that didn't have our countries or our partners' countries' best interests at heart. And so I was in the business of creating strong, healthy, collaborative relationships.
How often are people disappointed by that description of your job whenever they have preconceived notions of what somebody in your field would have worked as based on what they would have seen on TV or the movies? They have this kind of James Bond kind of persona in their minds, but it's much more human based than that.
They're probably disappointed every time I open my mouth. Because it's not, as I say, the hooky spooky spy stuff. Although I did all that. I mean, I worked double agent operations. I worked false flags. I did espionage investigations. I conducted hundreds of interviews. I've talked to and recruited spies. But at the heart of, so when you're trying to boil down the heart of everything, and we'll do a thought experiment. Since we mentioned James Bond, we'll do a James Bond thought experiment. James Bond doesn't operate alone, does he?
No, true. He's part of a team. He's just at the spear, the tip of that team, but he does have other people he works with. Yeah,
absolutely. He is a single point of success or failure of that team. But that team is not going to support him unless he has good, strong, healthy relationships with Moneypenny, Q, M, and then his sources that are giving him information. And if he is a complete ass, he's not going to get what he needs to get in order to be the single point of success. He's going to be a single point of failure. And so that's what actually it takes. And so when you put aside the Hollywoodized portion of, trying to thwart our nation's allies and our partners' allies through subterfuge and deception and manipulation, yeah, you can get short-term wins like that, but it's going to have very, very short-term effects, because ultimately when you use manipulative tactics and you use that kind of ploys when engaging people, there will be buyer's remorse engaging with you, and no one will want to see you ever again. Your reputation gets thrown in the toilet and your brand goes down the sink. So your ability to be effective from that point forward is greatly diminished. So if you focus on trust, you focus on strong, healthy relationships, even if the person doesn't want to engage with you, doesn't want to cooperate with you, that brand reputation of being that person that says, okay, that's fine with me today. If you do ever happen to change your mind, I'm right here for you. If you happen to know anyone that might have a pain point or challenge in their life that needs a solution that you think I might be appropriate for, let them know to come seek me out. Otherwise, I'll be right here for you whenever you need. Yeah, so pretty simple.
There's no great mystery then to it. And I suppose the mystery was, well, the beginning of the solving of that mystery, certainly for you, happened whenever you were in the military. You were in the Marines, and you learned a lesson very early on from one of your superiors about how to become a better leader and a better communicator. And it involved shifting your language away from you and onto others. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, 100%. And great job of drawing that up, because that is really the key of everything in life. Especially if you're at least half the world, if not more, and you're a hard-charging type A, as I call it. And also our society and business norming that we have around us and conditioning says we have to drive, we have to succeed, we have to do all these things. We, meaning I, have to do all these things to be successful in order to get the promotion, in order to be recognized, in order to get the accolades I want for myself, my family, or whoever. And especially if you cascade that on a background where most of us come from if we're middle to lower middle class, and that is no silver spoons. And we had to kind of grit and grind it out when we're growing up. I didn't come from a family of any money. We had no, matter of fact, I had to go to the United States Naval Academy because either that or don't go to college at all. I wanted to serve my country, so that was kind of a good overlap right there. But it was either work at a gas station after I graduated high school or go to the Naval Academy. It's really feast or famine. And so I had a lifetime of reps. I call everything we do in life, every experience we have on the journey is a rep. And I had a lifetime of reps of trying to take care of myself, trying to make myself feel safe, trying to accomplish things to move myself forward. Well, that's very self-centered. It's not wrong. It's just I was in survival mode. When we go into survival mode, which we're genetically and biologically coded for, and we're going through struggles, we tend to be very self-focused. And it's not like narcissistic, egomaniac self-focus. This is literally a survival mechanism so we can make sure that we are safe. And if you have a lifetime of reps of struggle, you tend to be that way a little bit more. Again, everything in life's a dichotomy between self and others. And so my dichotomy between these two things was a little unbalanced towards self. My caring for others was very deep. And so if I inadvertently wounded someone by my language, as we're going to get to, as you asked, it wounded me internally. I could see the reaction I had in others, because another thing that people that are struggling throughout life is we're very good at reading our environments to make us feel safe. And so when I was wronging someone by my language, by my intentions, by my actions, I could tell I made them stressed. I made them uncomfortable. And I had no idea why, and it wounded me. And I wanted to make sure, what do I need to do different? I owned that behavior and said, what do I need to do differently? So I was popular, though, as gregarious, outgoing storytelling guy. That's why I give narrative answers like I'm giving you right now. And so when I had that humbling moment in the Marine Corps, when I was ranked last out of all these second lieutenants, and I owned it, I asked, like you referred to, I asked my major, what am I doing wrong? And he gave me that subjective answer, just need to be a better leader, which blew my mind, because at that point in my life, I'd equated popularity, I'd equated gregarious and outgoingness, extroversion with leadership. No, it wasn't. Because leadership is ultimately about others. It's being a service to others. It's being a facilitator of their success to move their ball down the field, to move that needle down the field, as well as ours. And so then I probed deeper and I said, so I don't get that, because I thought I was. What specifically do I need to do differently? And he said, well, you need to focus on other people instead of yourself. Again, when you don't have a lifetime of reps and all you have is subjective interactions and learning, I had no idea what he's talking about. So kind of laid down that gauntlet. And I didn't realize that I had been using language such as I was always telling people my thoughts and opinions and the things I cared about. I was always telling people what was going on in my life, the challenges, pain points, and priorities I had that I was focused on. I wasn't very curious about what was going on in their lives because I was too much in pain of trying to focus on myself. And then giving people choices, why give people choices? I'm right. I'm just going to tell you what to do. That was the behaviors I had. So when you reverse that, and those things made me feel good, but it didn't make anyone else feel good, because that dichotomy is out of balance. And so these are the 4 keys of communication. If we reverse those, and it focuses on them, it makes them say, I value you, I understand you, I want to affiliate you. Their dopamine, their serotonin, and long-term oxytocin, their pleasure centers in their brain are firing when, number 1, we reverse and we seek their thoughts and opinions instead of sharing ours. 2, we speak in terms of their challenges, priorities, and pain points in life instead of telling them ours. 3, which is the golden one of them all, and that is non-judgmental curiosity about who they are, their life's arc, their journey, the spark that inspired them to be in front of you today. And you do so without judging. You do so with deep curiosity, and not curiosity. This is going to take it up to the mastery level. Not curiosity about what it is you want to learn about them. That's nice, but it's still about you. Be curious about what it is that they're willing to share with you. And so that takes a really fine touch. And then finally, you empower them with choices. And using a simple word like if is a beautiful way to give a choice. And so when you include one of those 4 statements in everything you're doing, whether it's writing, virtually, or live engagement with someone, You're demonstrating to them that you value them, you see them, and it's all about them. That's the language that engages their brain and says, this is a person in my life I can start to begin to trust and I can form an alliance with. This is the language of leaders. Matter of fact, the last point I'll make is ask yourself this question. This is a beautiful question that Robin Sharma put in one of his books, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, and there's a few other beautiful ones he wrote. But think about who you love to see walking through that door, whether it's your mother, your father, a grandparent, or a great leader you worked for, someone, a coworker that you just light up when they walk through that door, or you see an email come in from, because you know they're going to make you feel like $1 million. And then ask yourself, are you that person to everyone else? And what is that person doing to make you light up? I guarantee you this. They're being very curious about what's going on in your life, and they can't wait to hear about it.
How do those pillars that you just mentioned there, how do those pillars feature then whenever you're an FBI agent then working with a source?
It's a great question. It's a simple way to do it. Instead of walking through doors, like so down here in Fredericksburg, Virginia, where I live now, this is where I spent the last couple of years of my career before I retired. Besides recruiting spies and all that fun stuff, which is the same methodology, believe it or not. But a lot of my time, I'm working with companies. I'm working with clear defense contractors in my area down here. We have about 600 of them because I'm just south of Washington, D.C. And there are nation threats out there that do not have their companies or our nation's best interests at heart, like China, Russia, Iran. And so instead of walking through their door, cold calling, or even on a phone, or you set up a meeting and saying, hey, I think China's eating your lunch and stealing all your technology. We really need to partner together. That is telling them what I think. It's not it. And if they don't think that at all, I'm totally blowing through the potential resistance. It's making a total guess about what's going on in their life. As opposed to, you reverse that language. You can still have the same goal to see if we can partner together and see if we can do something to counter what China might be trying to do to subvert their company and their bottom line, as well as the national security of our country. And so instead of saying, I think China's eating your lunch and taking advantage of you, you say, hey, what do you think about China? And then I'll get their feedback on what they think about China. And if they happen to say, I think they're eating our lunch, then instead of saying, you need to do this, I say, I kind of agree with that as well. What kind of things do you think we might be able to do together and collaborate on that I can bring resources to bear to make it a little bit better, a little bit easier for you to do your job and be successful? Who's that all about? It's about them. Meanwhile, what's my goal and objective? To partner with them to protect the national security of the United States. But instead of making that statement about me and what I want to partner with you, and I want you to give me all your technology and information that the Chinese are trying to hack into, so I can make myself look good and protect my own job. I made that about them by using that language.
So this is where goals, priorities, objectives, and resources all align. They all coalesce.
100%. Because I went in, I sought their thoughts and opinions instead of giving them mine. I asked them about a priority, challenge, and pain point, if China was one of those things. And now if they said China wasn't, I said, is there any other things that you think I might be able to help you with? My area of expertise is counterintelligence. We protect companies that are trying to be hacked from corporate espionage as well as foreign nation states. Does any of that sound like it might be interesting to you? Again, seeking a thought and opinion, seeing if I have resources that are in terms of their challenges, priorities, and pain points if I don't happen to know them. And then what did I do? I then sought another thought and opinion. I got their context. I was curious without judging it. And then I empowered them with choices if they think we might be able to move forward with it.
I heard you speak before about engaging with a source, and that didn't go quite according to plan because, again, you made the conversation more about yourself. I think this was when you were working in New York at one point.
Yeah. Yes, it was. Great job. Yeah. So that was a great humbling moment I was probably in my early mid 30s. I'd been in the FBI a number of years. And I loved working in human sources. Working in the world of counterintelligence is fantastic because you're dealing with great, fantastic human beings that the bad guys are trying to go after. We're trying to get, partner with them as well, because these are great human beings that have a lot of information knowledge. We had an individual that had been a confidential human source of the FBI's for a number of years because we had a Russian intelligence officer that's in touch with them. And so we're getting lots of valuable information about the individual, the Russian bad guy. And the Russian bad guy leaves the country, gets rotated out. So there's no reason to have the source open. So the source gets closed down and is handled by another agent. The agent moves on down to headquarters. We now get a new Russian bad guy in town, reinitiates contact with this confidential human source. I'm like, yeehaw, because at this point in my career, I had some success. I had decent success with recruiting sources, doing operations, because I love this work. It's strategizing a great dialogue with a human being is a lot of fun, because it's just a reaction you see when people smile and light up and you make their day really great for interacting with you. It's a great experience. And so I got really excited because, like, wow, this is an easy one. This gentleman's already been a source of ours. We got a bad guy in touch with him. So this is like pure gold sitting on a platter for me. I talked to the last case agent. I said, hey, can you set up a meeting and do an introduction to me and Sean? We'll call the guy. And he said, sure. And Sean was a researcher going for his PhD at Columbia University in New York, hardcore science guy. That's why the bad guys wanted him too. And so I get the meeting, I go to the meeting. And now at this point in my career, I'd had a lot of fun learning how to spend the government's money on fine meals, trying to go to different events together because we don't really pay much, but we can at least make you feel like $1 million and treat you well, at least do a good meal because it's the government. And so I'd gotten really good at doing vouchers at this point. It's like, hey, let's have some fun. Let's make work and play all at the same time, because that's what I wanted to do. I totally disregarded the individual I was working with or potentially working with. This guy was a hardcore scientist who then I can't remember. He told me half of this. And I knew half of this from looking at the file and talking to the last case agent. He had just gone through a divorce. He was battling with child custody issues, and he's also working on his PhD in mechanical engineering or something like that. So he did not have a lot of time, but he's willing to help. And so here I come in, a ball of energy, and this guy is a hardcore technical, tactical, strategic guy that doesn't have a lot of time, willing to help. And you get someone like me coming in with lots of anecdotes, stories, narrative answers, narrative questions like this, and it drives someone like that up a wall. And then when I said, hey, why don't we get together again for another cup of coffee and maybe we'll talk about going to a Yankee game, New York Yankee game. And he's like, huh, what? And he goes, Robin, what specifically can I do for you? And I go, well, I don't really know yet. Let's just get together again and have some fun. And he goes, okay. And he walks away. And 3 days later, I try to contact him and he wouldn't pick up the phone, wouldn't answer the call, wouldn't return emails. I finally do what any good person does that feels jilted by a boyfriend or girlfriend. I changed phone numbers and called him again. So he picked up and he said, Robin, he said, I'm sorry, but I just can't work with you. And I was devastated. And I said, what happened? And he goes, he said, you just really don't understand what it is you're trying to do yet. I don't really have time for this. And I'm sorry, click. Humbling moment, man. Everyone's got humbling pie in their lives. And that was mine. I went to my supervisor, said, we got to close Sean. And he goes, why? But you're the source guy. I said, yeah, but I blew it because I made it about me. So good life lesson in there.
And you've learned from that ever since, by the sounds of things.
You try, but that's why we have in our lives loving critics. And loving critics are those people that care deeply about us, but not about the outcome that we are seeking. Because when we get emotionally attached to the outcome, we can make some really confirmation bias, bad decisions from time to time. We're not objective enough for ourselves, and we can't be. It's very challenging. I can be this for someone else 95 to 99% of the time. I'm very accurate on strategizing, great dialogue, great healthy relationships. For myself, I can maybe 75% because we get emotionally attached to the outcome we're looking for. So being aware of that, like my wife is my loving critic. If she gives me the no-go, if she says, what are you doing? If she calls me nuts, no matter how emotionally invested I am, however I think I got this right, I pause, I stop. I try not to get defensive because when we don't Robert Greene, in his book, Laws of Human Nature, states very clearly, human beings love to have our own thoughts and opinions validated by others. We consume information that validates our own thoughts all the time. That's why CNN and Fox News in the United States they have their loyal listeners, and nary the two will meet. And so same thing with ourselves. We only will consume information that validates our own opinion that we've already thought of most of the time. That's why we got to do good science experiments with all information and relationships we have. And if we can't, which we can't, you have a loving critic in your life to be objective for you.
One of the things that I underlined from the book was the expectation of reciprocity, or not expecting reciprocity. That was
Yeah.
key, certainly for you in your line of work.
Yeah, it's called an agenda. I've evolved it to the point is I just finished my manuscript on my next book. And if you're going to do the greatest service that you can do to another human being, here's what it is. If you want to give the greatest gift you can possibly give another human being, it costs nothing. And this is it. Be present. That's it. Now, here's how hard it is to be present. You have to be curious about them, what it is that they're looking to share with you, without an agenda. And that's the key, without an agenda. An agenda is why, with no expectation reciprocity, is that on steroids. It's that elevating to that mastery level. Because when you go into an engagement with an expectation reciprocity, who are you really doing the engagement for? You or them. Mm. And if this starts, and especially now, you can do these things. The world is full of people that are we're all in sales. We're all selling ourselves, if nothing else, to another human being that, you want us in our lives, or we have a product or service, whatever it is. That's fine. But if you start using subterfuge or lack of transparency with that individual, now it's all about you. And so even if you have an agenda, be transparent with your agenda. And that way you can make it about them. Because when you are transparent, say, listen, my boss says I have to close this deal in 5 minutes because I'm on a timeline. The whole company's on a timeline right now. And if that's not good for you, let me know. And I'll totally leave you alone. And maybe you can refer me to someone else. But if you're comfortable with this timeline, I'd love to share what I think can be a really good resource for you in your life. You tell me how you want to move forward. So again, but when you do these things without that expectation of reciprocity, and you're deeply present for others, it alleviates any sense in the other person that you're there to take advantage or manipulate them.
How do you straddle that fine line, though, between being honest and transparent and being diplomatic? Because I've been accused in the past of being a little bit too honest and too blunt and too forthright with my opinion.
Huh. Are you, for whose benefit are you being transparent? And
yeah,
that seriously, that is, people will use the excuse, well, I'm just being honest. I'm just being transparent. No, you're not. You're being a dick. Excuse my language. So
yeah, no, that's a good
you got to
point.
ask yourself, so there's another great book, Reed Hastings, who was the CEO of Netflix. He wrote a book called No Rules Rules. One of the principles they have in Netflix was transparency of communication. So you could say anything you needed to say, not wanted to say, needed to say, to any executive anywhere, at any time, in the middle of a meeting, a dialogue, a negotiation. But here is the rule. It had to benefit what the why was. It had to benefit the individual that you're speaking to, for no self-glory, for no ego, for no getting things off of your chest to make yourself feel better, to build yourself up in any way. It had to be of benefit to the ultimate bottom line of the why we're here and meeting. And it had to come at a time, this is the diplomat side, it had a time where it wasn't going to, again, you can say things that might not be received well, but if you have a relationship built on trust and you have that reservoir built, you can say things that are transparent to others, as long as they understand it's not because it's personal, it's because we're actually going towards this bottom line. And so, yeah, if we're putting word modifiers before being a jerk to someone, you're just being a jerk. Like, a lot of people like to use manipulation techniques, and they'll call it tactical empathy, or they'll call it, I love when people use it's, what's the other word that, I'm totally blanking my mind because I was talking about it. Not strategic, not tactical, but it's
situational, possibly.
No, it's ethical. There, my word, ethical. So they'll use, it's ethical hacking, or it's ethical manipulation, or it's ethical persuasion, ethical influence. Even those words, I use inspiration instead of those words, because even with the words influence and persuasion, if you look up the definition, it's about you getting people to do what you want. Who's that about? And then they'll throw that word ethical in front of it to make it sound nice, to placate themselves. If you're on the receiving end of it, that word ethical means nothing to you. You're just feeling like you were taken advantage of. So I don't like using the word modifiers ethical in front of everything. If you have to use a word modifier and ethical in front of anything, ask yourself whether you have to do that or not.
We've been talking about language thus far in order to build rapport between two people on a human level. What about nonverbal communication? Did that factor much in your work at all?
100%. 100%. Lots of congruency. Human beings, for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, we've evolved. And one of the things we're very good at from our biology and genetics is feeling safe. We crave feeling safe. And one of the ways we feel safe is when we see and can recognize in the world around us congruency between our language that people are using and the emotions that they have. And when we see things are incongruent, it makes us feel creepy. It makes us feel off. There's something wrong with that person. I don't quite know, whenever you've had that experience where you say, I don't quite know what's off, but something's not right. You know what you're seeing? And that's what you boil down and ask yourself, what are you seeing? Because you're seeing something. You don't have some super spider sense. You have reps in knowing what discomfort looks like and knowing what someone looks like when they're unsafe. And what you're seeing is incongruence between words, actions, and deeds. So what they're saying is maybe all about you. They're using those 4 keys of communication very, very well. They're making it all about you by seeking your thoughts and opinions, talking in terms of your priorities, being curious about you, giving you some choices, thinking of sales in particular. But there's something a little off, even though using all the things. And you know what's off? Most likely their tempo is off because they're pressing a tempo a little bit faster than you're comfortable with, and they should be adjusting their tempo to you. And most importantly, in here, what they're feeling, they're there to take advantage of you, and you can sense it. Because non-verbally, they might have an aggressive stance. They might be staring directly at you. Their intensity level is not matching their words of comfort. So that's what we're picking up on.
I'm actually glad you mentioned staring there, because I'm very interested in the power of eye contact. Where do you stand on that?
It's got to be comfortable for the person receiving it. Yeah. If we think about the things that we need to do, I used to, because there's lots of techniques. I call them carnival skills and carnival tricks to build rapport, and like matching the head tilt to one side, the mirroring, the smiling, the eye gaze, the eyebrow flash. All these things are very, very good nonverbals. But think about this. If you're thinking about what it is that you're doing, that's 1 second away from focusing on what they're looking for. And so if you just focus on them and you become if you are deeply curious without an agenda, you will naturally do all those things, and you'll have beautiful congruence between you. You have synchronicity, and it's what people call, it's organic. It's real. That's what's real. And so when you can get to that level, now granted, all that training, all those things, I'm not dismissive of it at all. I did it all. In order to understand why it worked, you actually have to do it. You have to fall in love with the process of doing it and understand why that works. Eliciting PIN numbers and dates of birth and all that fun elicitation stuff where you get people to tell you stuff they shouldn't have told you. Yeah, it works. But then at some point you realize, wow, I'm just playing with people. Who was I really doing that for? Were they benefiting, or was I benefiting? Was my ego and vanity benefiting from me being able to do that? And then you stop doing it. And then you start asking yourself, why was that working? Oh, because they trusted me and I took advantage of that trust. I don't do that anymore. And so that's why all those things do work. And when it comes to eye gaze, yeah, it's a great thing if that's what they're comfortable with. If you start eye gazing with someone and looking at them, and all of a sudden they start turning away or their blink rate changes, that means they're a little uncomfortable. Watch for stress. If you're inducing stress by what you're doing, you know what you should do? Stop doing it. Adjust. And if nothing else, apologize. People are never looking for perfection. They're looking for effort. And a lot of times, so some of us, we just naturally are really intense. When someone is speaking, we want to pay deep attention to things they're saying without that agenda so we can really zero in on them. And if we've ever heard that might be a little off-putting with our look, our mannerisms or anything, but we can't do anything about it, you can do something I call negating the frame. Before you start engaging, says, listen, Matthew, you're a great guy. I'm really looking forward to a great conversation with you. I've been told this, and so I'm going to tell you ahead of time. I naturally can look a little intense when I'm paying deep attention to you, and it can be off-putting. So I'm going to let you know before we start talking, I might look like this, but it's nothing more than my deep curiosity when we're having a chat. So if you do see that, I apologize ahead of time. So please tell me about your life journey. And so right then, you now will dismiss it. It's not a big deal.
Is you being transparent again? You're actually doing what you said you were going to do. Can I ask you in relation to leadership? We spoke about leadership earlier on, and we're talking about great communicators. Off the top of your head, could you give me an example of leaders that you look up to and examples of great communicators that the listeners would probably know?
I'll go history because, these
It's
days,
less controversial. Yeah.
these days you pick one person, half the world's going to line up against you. I'm a great lover of reading history. Then there's been no one person that's done it all well. There's aspects, and like right now I'm going through a bunch of different Civil War leaders in the United States just because I got fascinated by Ulysses S. Grant, who was the Civil War general and president of the United States 2 terms. And he was a fantastic communicator. He imbued trust in people immensely because he cared deeply about people. But his fall is to his detriment. He was too trusting. He became very gullible, and people in a corrupt government took advantage of him. So he was very trusting. He also had an amazing ability. He fought a nation, whereas people like General Lee from the South, Stonewall Jackson, who I'm finishing his book right now, they could fight an army, but not a nation. And so there's tactics and strategies in there for that. On the converse side, Stonewall Jackson, who is, his name is Thomas Jackson. So, but he's known as Stonewall because he was regarded as a great heroic leader of the South during for the Confederates during the Civil War. He was a horrible communicator. His people under him had no idea what they're doing or why they're doing it. So as a leader, he was a great tactician, horrible leader. I'll give you a great example from history because, again, when you read biographies, you get a deeper look at people than the paintbrush swath we have. Napoleon. Let's talk about Napoleon. I just got done reading the biography of Napoleon. Think about this. No matter what anyone thinks about Napoleon, because Winston Churchill, when World War II broke out, and Winston Churchill even regrets using the analogy of putting Napoleon and Hitler in the same statement in the same press conference, because then everyone equated the two together. Napoleon was nothing like Hitler, because what Napoleon was really good at is the people loved him, especially his troops loved him. And ask yourself, so why? So here's a guy that claimed himself emperor, but if you go into how that all happened, it was because the government was in such a disarray, and he happened to be the right guy at the right time, coming into the city. He sought it without seeking it, so he had that kind of ability. But things he did really well, when he was 19 years old, he gave up all his salary as a cadet, and he only ate 1 meal a day so he could read. He was a vast reader of history. He learned from history. His 2 favorite people were Alexander the Great and Caesar. And so he modeled everything he could after them and the lessons he learned from them. He had, in all leaders, I've seen the greatest overarch of the great people throughout history, whether a leadership position or just a person as known by infamy, is deep curiosity. Leonardo da Vinci, deep curiosity. Einstein, deep curiosity. Benjamin Franklin, deep curiosity. Napoleon, deep curiosity. And here's how he balanced that dichotomy. So here's a guy, he gets ousted by the adversaries, his ally. Well, the allies are allied against him. So he abdicates the throne. So here's a guy during the 1800s in a time period where they executed and cut people's heads off. He abdicates the throne, and they don't kill him. They send him to Elba. And after not even a year, so he's ousted. The whole world says, no more Napoleon. Everyone hates you, Napoleon. Go away. In less than a year, he hears rumors that the Bourbons are not doing a good job in France, and he hears people want him back. Are you nuts? This guy, this tyrannical guy, according to others, some, there's no way. How could he come back? Everyone hated him. Well, he gets on a bunch of ships with less than 1,000 people, lands in southern France, and on that ship ride over, they talk about the sailors and men that were with him. And you know what he first did? He was curious about them. Tell me where you're from. What's going on in your life? What kind of challenges, pain points are going on in your life? He's curious. And also, he balanced that with, he was also interesting. So he wasn't just interested in others. He was interested. He's so well read. He's world traveled. So all the soldiers, everyone on the ship was asking him about him. And he was what? He was transparent. He was open. He's vulnerable. He very clearly said you what he wasn't good at. He knew what he wasn't good at. And he was transparent about it. And so by the time he landed and marches all the way up to Paris, he had everyone behind him again. That's leadership.
It really is.
Why?
And it's amazing. Certainly from my own experience, I've noticed down through the years that the people who I'm drawn to most are people who are most interested in me and ask me questions on a human level about what I'm doing and who I'm seeing or where I went on holidays, and they care, or at least they pretend they care. And then that, because there's that thing too, people love to talk about themselves. So if somebody else gives me the opportunity to talk about myself because they've shown interest and curiosity in me, well, then I'm going to love that person. And the other thing too is, and maybe you'll confirm this, people hearing their name in conversation. Is this something that you would have done intentionally in order to draw people in and build rapport?
It's Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Number one thing, the sweetest sound in any language is your own name. So yes, and that's why podcasting is great, because what you're doing is, for every guest, is you're doing all those things, getting someone to share their life story, their arc of how it is they became who they are today. The interesting thing is, and this is what, going back to Napoleon, you can be very chatty, and how do you be interesting and talk a lot at the same time? This is where you can really do a little, I do these little things when you're like fine tuning to be interesting. If you're naturally extroverted and you talk a lot, when you're sharing, don't share about you, share about the things you've experienced. In other words, don't be a me former, be an informer. Share things that might be of benefit to others that they might be interested in. So even though you're doing a speaking, and because if you're engaging someone that just isn't comfortable talking, they are very curious, share information that is interesting to them, but not necessarily all about you. It can be shared knowledge that you have, but it was knowledge that was imparted through here and here. And just like we've done today, it's like we're talking about Napoleon, we're talking about Grant, we're talking about, Stonewall Jackson, we're talking about interesting people in history, which hopefully is interesting without being all about me. Trying anyway.
No, it's fascinating, and it's great to get your insights. You're no longer an FBI agent, and I'm just curious as to. Sorry?
Sorry. I said, thank God. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I'm just interested to find out whether you can go out in public now and sit down in a cafe without your spidey senses going off, your former spy detecting senses going off. I mean, if somebody suspicious walks through the door, I mean, how do you respond to that now as a former FBI agent? Because you're never really former in some senses. You still retain that skill set and that experience and expertise.
So the skill set I think you're referring to really is baselining the world around you. I talk about this a lot when I go on TV at night and do true crime stuff. And, it's like right now I've been on TV a few times for an escaped convict in Pennsylvania.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen the clips on YouTube.
Okay. And so you know what I'm speaking about. And so how do you protect yourself in situations like that? So you're not taking FBI skills I learned. So what did you learn in all these things we've been talking about? So we'll bring it back to everything we've been talking about. The agenda thing. If you're trying to see something, you might find it, but you're going to miss everything else. Let's use deception detection. I'm sure you've talked about that with people. If you're trying to find deception, you'll probably find it. It might not be real, but you're going to find deception, and you're going to miss all the truth everywhere else because you're giving yourself a confirmation bias of what you're looking for. So if you're trying to find things that are wrong, you might miss what's actually there because you're so narrowly focused. So what I always say is, if you're trying to baseline and be safe, let go. Don't try. In other words,
don't judge then. Don't judge us.
Right. Just see the environment around you. If you can approach every situation, my good friend Jim Pyle says it in his books very well. He's a great negotiator and hostage crisis negotiator kind of guy. And he says, if you can approach every situation as a young child, as if you know nothing, be curious. And so when you can sit there, say you're in a shop and you want to, am I safe in this environment? Well, just take a look around and just see what's the tempo of everyone around you. What are they wearing? What are they looking? What's on the floor? What what things do they have with them? What props are they using in life? So you're getting a sense of what normal looks like. And I think tempo goes a long way in all these things, because when someone has an agenda, their tempo becomes out of sync with the world around them, because they're on a mission. I'm going to blow this place up. I'm going to take advantage of this person. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, because they're on a mission and focus. And so when you're sitting there in any environment, just be present, no agenda, and observe. Be in the now. Eckhart Tolle talks about the power of now. Be in the now, be in the present, and just see what's around you and observe, and just sweep quadrant by quadrant with the curiosity, not like I'm trying to find something. No, just see and observe, because what will happen is something that stands out, your attention will go to, and say, why did my attention go to that? What's going on with that? I do it. That's what I do all the time now. I'll watch a TV movie. And the first thing I notice my wife loves watching true crime, and she watches all these BBC movies and everything. The first thing that strikes me when I watch these things, their clothes. All their clothes are brand new. I don't care what outfits they're wearing or where they are. I'm watching. I look at the props. Props stand out to me because it stands out from the environment. Like, wow, that person, they're supposed to be they're supposed to be downtrodden. They're supposed to just come into town. And why do they have something that look like it just came off the rack? I mean, so those are the kind of things that stick out to me. During a conversation, like podcasting, or just having a conversation with someone in a shop or at work, when you're sitting there without an agenda of what it is you want to ask, what it is you want to see or say, and you just hear their words. Words have an arc of the things, the tempo of what they're saying. All of a sudden you hear a word in there that kind of deviates a little bit. It's like, ooh, what's that word mean? Let's go down that path. That's an interesting word. And that's why we fill out the nooks and crannies. And so we do that with our environment around us. And we do this when people are engaging with. So you engage without that agenda, like we mentioned earlier, allows you to be present. And when you're present, you see more, because you see everything without judging it. So that way you can see something that stands out. Then we can explore and be curious. Why is that standing out? Is that normal? Is that healthy? Is that safe? So those are the things we start assessing.
How do we engage with somebody who has a completely different perspective to yours? So they're white and you're black in terms of your viewpoint. How do you meet in the middle as such? Or what way do you approach the engagement with that person such that it doesn't descend into an argument?
I love those moments. I love hearing someone say something I don't know, I don't agree with, or is completely out of the blue. So here's a way to approach that situation. First of all, do you not put a lot of time, effort, and thought into the things that you think can come out of your mouth?
Yep.
And so does everyone. So give everyone the respect that if it's coming out of their mouth, it means a lot to them. Let's find out why. How did they get that context? Brene Brown talks about, if you don't understand someone, good, get closer. And if you want to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, which is fantastic, that's called empathy, you better take yours off first, otherwise you'll get blisters. And so let's get some deep curiosity about how it is they came up with that without judging it. So it's that deep curiosity and the respect that gets thrown out. That's such an empty word these days, but because people say it, but they don't have it. Seriously, how did you come up with that line of thought? That's really intriguing. I just love doing those thought experiments. I love getting closer, because that is really, it's fascinating to me. Oh, and so here's the bottom line that we all have in common. We all want to feel safe. That's it. Human beings are exceptionally predictable. You and everyone in our lives around us, you can predict what they're going to do every moment of every day. You and they are going to act in their own best interests in terms of their safety, security, and prosperity as they see it from their point of view for themselves and those people they care about in their lives. So if they're taking an action, they're saying something, that's because they think it's in their best interest to do so. Who are you to judge it? Find out why. Because you know what? A lot of times you're probably going to expand your knowledge, because if you're speaking, you're no longer learning. You can only speak, you can only learn when you shut up.
So much wisdom, so much wisdom. I'm struck really. Can I tell you this? You strike me as a very human for somebody who was a former spook recruiter. You're not at all what I would have expected for somebody who worked in that field. And I suppose I'm biased by the fact that I've watched movies and TV for years, but really, more than anything, the takeaway I think from this episode is so important to engage with somebody on a human level.
We crave it. We need it. It's especially post-COVID. COVID taught us a lot about ourselves and taught us a lot about what we need. I got my goosebumps going and get a little misty thinking about it. We need each other hard. Isolation is horrendous. We are not on this planet to be isolated. It is horrendous. And the way we overcome it is people have forgotten about how to have a great conversation and create an ally in life, to create a partner in life, to be vested in someone else other than yourself. There's lots of 12-step programs out there for people in all kinds of different recovery, whether recovering from alcohol addiction, drug addiction, overeating, gambling, you name it. But all these 12-step programs, the last step in all of them is to be of service to others. Because when you're of service to others, which is leadership, which is selflessness, which is being there for someone else without an agenda, solving a challenge, priority, or pain point with no expectation or reciprocity, what it does for us psychologically, mentally, spiritually, physically, I don't care what you call it, it's immense. If you're having a bad day, if you're feeling down, the first thing I want you to do is do something for someone else. You're going to feel like $1 million, guaranteed. It'll start bringing you back.
Again, brilliant advice. Sizing People Up is the name of the book. Robin, you mentioned you're working on another manuscript. Can you tell me anything about that at all?
Love to. We talked about it all day. That's what we did. So Sizing People Up was my third book. It's the evolution of from rapport to trust to assessing others for how they view us in life. And the next one is Unstoppable Alliances. And that is putting all these things together. How do we create good, healthy alliances and trust in our lives and relationships? It's a business book for leadership, but it's exactly all these life lessons we've been talking about all day long. So I'm hoping I'm in the midst of landing a publisher again, or it'll be self-published. Either way, the manuscript's done. And if it's self-published, we'll be out this fall or winter. Depends on how fast I get on more shows like yours with it. But we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it is done. It is written, and it's a joy, no doubt.
Well, it's been a joy to talk to you today. Author Robin Dreeke, author of Sizing People Up. Thank you so much for taking the time to dispense some of your terrific advice today and some of your life experience with me on the podcast.
It's my pleasure, Matthew. Thank you so much for having me on. And for everyone that's tuning in, the last thing I want to make sure everyone does, hit like, hit subscribe, and send this around to all your friends. Matthew puts a lot of time and effort into these episodes, so make sure that other people can benefit from it too. Thank you.
You're a star. You're an absolute star. Appreciate that.